Right, let's make a start. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this evening's meeting. Welcome to members, fellow councillors, and above all, welcome to our officers, guest presenters, and observers. My name is Councillor Nikos Souslous. I am the chair, and it's my pleasure to have you all here today. Before we begin, just a few quick housekeeping notices for all of you. Please wait for me to prompt you before speaking. And if you would like to speak, if you're not a presenter and you're a member of the audience, we'll try to make some time for you to speak, but this may not necessarily be happening. But if you would like to speak, please indicate by raising your hand and tell us who you are and your organization, if any. And today with us, we have officers, we have external guests, we have observers. If invited to speak, please introduce yourself. Make sure that your microphone is on with the green light on, and tell us who you are. And I would also like to welcome contributors who are joining us via Zoom. Emma Apthorpe, the mayor, and the lead member for Women and Girls will be joining us. Councillor Patricia Quigley, who is the lead member for Inclusive Community Engagement and Co-Production. And we'll also be joined by Martina Palmer, who is the interim head of services for refuge. As you know, co-production and inclusion are important parts of the narrative that we're discussing today, and we'll make sure that you're included. And if you need to speak, please let us know, and Bathsheba will be monitoring the screen and let us know. And we'll be joined by Councillor Rebecca Harvey, who is the cabinet member for social inclusion and community safety. She'll be here in a few minutes. We have a lot to cover today. I'm conscious of the limited time that we have. I wouldn't want to keep you until very late. And for that reason, please do not be offended if I have to interrupt and move the discussion along. And you must have seen the agenda. The issues that we're dealing with might be difficult for some participants here today, or those who are watching online. There are sources of support. There's advice and information available on the council website. Help is available. You're not alone. And please let us know if there's any way we can help you. And when we do publish the minutes of the meeting, we'll make sure that support links and information are also there. Help yourself to refreshments and ensure you have water. There's coffee, there's tea, there's biscuits at the back. And if you need a comfort break, there are facilities located just by the lifts, the way we came in. And the nearest fire exits are located near the lifts, and we're not expecting a fire alarm test today. So if the alarm goes off, let's make a move. Right, shall we begin? Item number 1 on our agenda, apologies for absence. We have apologies from Councillor Trey Campbell-Simon. Are there any other apologies? No, thank you. In that case, item number 2, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest from colleagues or other participants? No, that is great. So we can swiftly move to item number 3, which are the minutes of the previous meeting on that very warm July evening, July 19th. Does the meeting approve the minutes of the previous meeting? Thank you. Then in that case, the minutes are approved. And now we move on to the substantive agenda. Item number 4, which is the annual performance report for the law enforcement team. We have Mo Basith, who is the LET manager, and Neil Thurlow, who is the Assistant Director of Community Safety, Resilience and CCTV here with us, who would like to start presenting. Mo.
Good evening. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, everyone. Good evening. So in July 22, the law enforcement team presented performance data and achievements since the formation in April 2021. Since July 2022 to date, I just want to run over the figures and some of our feedback for Q2. So the LET has continued to deliver a high visibility frontline service 24 hours a day. And the report provides details of the work that LET have undertaken. In Q2, we've conducted over 23,806 patrols, which is an average of over 250 per day at hotspots and areas of concern, with officers working to investigate and resolve service requests, monitoring sites following incidents, or to inspect locations following referrals from a range of partners. The LET team has received 1,433 service requests from residents and businesses which have been investigated and resolved, Each request is acknowledged and tasked within hours of it being received, as the let inbox and the main referral methods are monitored 24/7. During the same period, let officers resolve most of the service requests without the need for enforcement. However, there have been a number of complex cases which have needed investigation, monitoring and enforcement, which can take upwards of 21 to 28 days where legal processes are followed. For the 3 months of this report, the let officers have issued 505 fixed penalty notices for issues such as fly tipping, littering and highways obstruction. The team continue to show a high visibility presence in all housing sites and parks throughout the borough, having completed over 5,500 patrols in housing land, and that equates to approximately 1,625 hours and in housing and 1,367 parks hours. In addition, nearly 4,000 hours of reassurance patrols have taken place in all highways and district centres, where it's the busiest and where we have the highest footfall, with particular emphasis on Shepherd's Bush and Hammersmith Broadway. Keeping our residents safe remains a high priority for the team, and as such, the let team have conducted over 1,154 weapon sweeps during their patrols. They have found and removed numerous knives, 5 in Quarter from the streets, and over the past 3 months, one which was deliberately concealed in Bishop's Park, which we managed to remove, having dispersed a large group of youths. So we came across this weapon immediately after. The let team have continued to focus on reducing ASB in all areas of the borough. From July 22 to September 22, the let have received 153 service requests to attend and address ASB related issues. A vast majority of the problems occurred in parks, and this is shown in Appendix 2 1.6. The let staff resolved these by attending the location, identifying those causing the ASB and engaging with the individuals. Most of these issues were resolved once the let officers engaged with the individuals. However, those that did not comply with the initial engagement were dispersed. Reports of ASB to service shows that most demands come from the north of the borough, and most incidents occur in the White City and Shepherd's Bush wards and in the parks within these wards. Due to the number of housing blocks within White City, there were approximately 35 ASB incidents identified and resolved by the let team. This includes unauthorized access by non-residents into blocks and drugs or drink consumption within the communal area.
Sorry, Mo, if I may interrupt,
Of
as I
course.
said, don't take
Of
it
course.
personally. I said this may happen. Thank you for this, which is also in the written report that you have. Thank you. Nice to see you, Councillor Harvey. Thank you for joining us. In the written report, perhaps you could also focus on the actions that we had from the last meeting. Just summarize quickly, what we said at the time, and what action has been taken or will be taken, and then we can focus perhaps more on the questions from the members. And I don't know if Neil will have something to add himself.
Sure. So from the actions taken away, there were a number of actions. One of them was to have better engagement with the ward officers. I'm pleased to say we reached out to every ward councillor and offered to meet with them and to also ask them to participate in some of the 24-hour operations that take place every 2 weeks. I'm pleased to say a vast majority of councillors have taken up the opportunity to meet their local ward officers and build those closer links. The other action to take away was to increase our engagement, and we've also done that by holding engagement events at parks throughout the borough and at local mosques within the north of the borough, and at also attending events at the Sands End Community Centre. We attend all TRAs and ward panel meetings, and if there's anyone that wants us to attend anything that we may not have yet, we're happy to do so. We've also fixed our contact details onto our site at Munn Street as requested by Councillor Taylor. So I'm pleased to say all our details are up there now as requested for the local residents. We've also spoken to the Youth Council to speak about the service. We have asked the attendees to provide us with ideas how we can increase our engagement with youngsters around the borough. In addition, all let staff will receive training from Youth Engagement Coordinator within the gangs team to understand the issues faced by the youngsters in our borough and ways to better engage them. We've also spoken with the West London Trust to explore how mental health awareness training can be delivered to all the officers on an ongoing basis. We were referred to Mind, who will now provide in-person training in December to increase the Let officers' knowledge and knowledge to further recognize signs and symptoms of depression, anxiety, psychosis, and PTSD. In the interim, all Let officers have undertaken in-house online mental health training. This covers areas such as communication with individuals with mental health issues and resilience building to overcome trauma. They now know how and when to make referrals for vulnerable people. This training will also now be integrated into the mandatory training Let officers receive when they start new with the service. Over the next few months, Let will work with the licensing team to promote Arts Angela. In addition, the team will increase walk-focused patrols over the winter months as it gets darker. And finally, the walk and talk event, which was scheduled for the 20th of September, has been postponed by the police due to the Queen's funeral. This will be rescheduled. However, I'm pleased to say the women's training, which takes place at Fulham Football Club, we've linked in with them and we're providing additional patrols just so that when they're leaving the site in the evening, they can have that reassurance of uniform presence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mo. It's very encouraging to see that the actions we sort of, I can remember all these came from different members of the committee, and you mentioned Councillor Taylor, and it's good to see that you've responded and you've taken action and that you came back to report to us. Neil, would you like to add something before we move on to questions?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Sisters. So I'll just reflect on a couple of bits really to enhance what Mo said. So the summer engagement was really important to us. We spent a lot of time where we knew people would be to allow our communities and our young people to understand who the Let are, how to speak to them, and also to develop our understanding about what their concerns were and where they wanted to be seeing the Let and when they wanted to see it. I think the theme of tonight obviously is around women's safety as well, you know, in the themes of the 3 reports going through. I think we'd be really, really proud and impressed with how the Let have taken the work around violence against women and girls and enhance that. And we're working to increase the number of Victor champions that we've got and the work that we're doing with the Let to be that visible deterrent and support piece. I think also it's important to note for PAC that the Let have also been involved in a lot of very high profile events. So we were front and centre with the Queen's funeral when the cortege came through the borough. We worked very closely with Gemma and her team, which we'll hear more about later on, around the August Bank Holiday weekend and how we could ensure that the residents of the borough had opportunities to enjoy the Bank Holiday weekend, but also saw the Let and were safe. And again, we've delivered with colleagues a very successful Remembrance weekend only a couple of weekends back. With the Let, you know, it's a very high profile and very important service to everyone. And the importance of feedback is ever present. And I think it's really important to kind of celebrate that our residents are coming through to us with compliments, with thanks of support to direct officers and to the service as a whole. And I think as officers and possibly as members, we hear a lot of concerns raised by residents, a lot of complaints potentially around services and how services are delivered. So I think we need to be very proud of the fact that we are getting a lot of positive named officers thank yous coming through to the service. And I'll probably pause there because I'm sure there's lots of questions. So thank you, Councillor Seuss.
Thank you, Neil. Shall we begin with questions from members? Yes, Councillor.
Thanks. Thank you very much for your reports. Yeah, it's great to see the work that's being done, and you're obviously very busy as a force, and I can back that up anecdotally. Just in the context of violence against women and girls, as you mentioned, you know, that's the kind of theme that's running through tonight. I wonder, I have 2 questions. The first is, could you tell us what the breakdown is of the Lets, how many of the Lets are women and how many are men? And secondly, what specific training is being provided on the point of violence against women and girls? So obviously there's mental health training, there's training, you know, how to interact with young people, presumably there's training how to interact with, you know, how to reach communities, be that economic or ethnic minority communities, whatever it might be. What is there specifically on violence against women and girls, if you can? Thank you.
So I'll answer your first point regarding the number of women and men. There are not as many female Let officers as we would like. However, I have spoken to the equalities team and I have requested that on the application itself, it states quite on the top of the application that we encourage female applicants because it is a very underrepresented group. So we're actively seeking more female let officers, and I'm pleased to say there is one joining in the next few weeks. So that's really good to hear. In regards to specific training, we've got mandatory training on identifying violence against women and girls, which all let officers have undertaken. And that is a recurring training that will take place every year. And it's just highlighting the issues women face and how we can identify and support them when we come across them.
If I can, thank you. Do you know what the exact number is? Men, women? And if not, if you could share that with us afterwards, if that's
Can I
okay,
share that
yeah?
separately? Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And I also wonder, so obviously identifying violence against women and girls is very important, but I guess, I'm by no means an expert on this, but I wonder if identification is the first stage and then how to interact with someone that might be, a victim of violence against women and girls, how to, take them to a safe, a whole sort of range of other steps. Is there anything that's being done with that? And if not, I think we have a, whole host of experts here that could potentially work with the LETs and help with that.
So yeah, I want to give you a recent example actually, which will probably demonstrate the understanding. Our officers are always in district centres, especially around pubs, clubs, and where the night economy is, especially in the evenings, especially since it's getting darker. They've been informed that they need to patrol in district centres and such areas where there's high footfall. So on this one occasion, we identified a female who was over intoxicated and she couldn't support herself. She had been separated with her family and her friends who she was out with, and this was quite recent. So we approached her, all the let officers approached her, asked her if we could help, and she said, "Can you call my mother?" We took her phone, we made that call, made them aware, and we stayed with that female until her mother came and picked her up. So that's the kind of real life incidents that we come across on our day-to-day patrols, and that's the kind of support we provide families and females that we come across with these issues. That's just one issue. There are several others. The work that we're doing near Fulham Football Club, for instance, they asked and said they don't feel safe, especially since it's getting dark. They're doing training there. By the time they finish, it's really dark. So our patrols are conducted to coincide with when they finish so that we can be on site to help them leave the site or to get to their vehicles so they can leave the site and feel safe doing so. No problem.
Thank you. Councillor Dinsmore.
Thank you. I've just three areas briefly to touch on. The first is at paragraph 8, you mentioned 1,154 weapon sweeps, which resulted in 5 knives being found. Obviously, congratulations on finding those 5 knives, and things are clearly safer as a result. It does seem that the efficacy of those weapon sweeps might be improved. Do you have any thoughts on how the LETs could go about doing that, getting a higher hit rate or more of these weapon sweeps hitting the spot, as it were?
So weapon sweeps is part of the patrol now, because if we're on site, we should also check to make sure they're not being secreted somewhere. I'm pleased to say we've got 5, but more recently we've found more. So I can share that in future with you, or I can share that separately. But, keeping residents and visitors safe is our priority, it's our #1 priority. And if removing these articles helps in our efforts, then, that's something that we'll continue to do. I would like to see an improvement on that, but to be honest, 5 is still very good in comparison to, not getting any at all, not finding any at all, because they've been, that's a particular incident at Bishop's Park where we were alerted to ASB with a group and we disturbed that gathering. And soon after we, found this weapons. So I think that was a good result for us.
Thanks. And if I could just briefly go through the figures in paragraph 15, just so I understand exactly what you mean. It's at the bottom of page 14. So you note 1,089 ASB patrols, 659, namely 60% required no further action? Just so I understand, I mean, that means you've done a patrol and there's been no incidents, as it were, there's been no ASB.
Yeah, so to better detail that, we've done so we received service requests, a number of those, and those are detailed in Appendix 2 or 1. We've done 1,089 patrols solely to address the ASB issues that are being raised. We've gone there and 60% of those needed no further action because ASB wasn't taking place there. But it just demonstrates that when something's reported to us, we go there, do a patrol to identify that issue and stop that issue. But then we don't stop at that point. We revisit until we address that issue and we're satisfied that it's been resolved so that it doesn't return.
Thanks. And then in 15B, you say that 33% engage with individuals or groups. What happens in the other 7%? So 60%, there's no action required. 33% you engage with individuals or groups. And what is the other 7%?
So there is no further action, or we disperse, or the other 7% is usually where we end up doing another task altogether. For instance, we're there, so we pick up another task altogether after engaging with residents. So they might say, well, that ASB is not happening now, but there's another issue that you need to address. So we pick up. So that's where the 7% lies.
Thanks. And the last area is not really about the report, but it's more macro. When we met in July, we discussed some of the rise in violent crime that's been happening in London. And part of your job in that is the weapon sweeps. I think you mentioned last time, you used the phrase where effectively you're a professional witness in those scenarios, or if there's a mugging or something like that. Do you think you would benefit from more police support for those type of incidents? Or put another way, if I may, do you feel you have the training and equipment to be able to tackle those sort of incidents?
So the training that we received is, I believe, is adequate, especially since when we last spoke, I mentioned that just the mere fact that we're on site, I'd like to think that we deter that kind of violent crime. Violent crime is increasing throughout London, but the benefit our residents have is that they've got constant presence, uniform presence on the streets. I mean, the figures of our patrols speak for themselves. We're there in all the areas where we need to be at the time where the footfall is the highest. So where these incidents occur, we're there, and should we need to intervene, I would expect our officers to gather the evidence and call in the radio police support with their radios as soon as they can. And, hopefully we deter that in the first place, but if we don't, we're on site to provide the support to the victim.
Thanks very much. And thanks for all your hard work.
Thank you. I have a few questions myself. I know it's in paragraph 19, you mentioned that you will be starting law enforcement team surgeries, which is a very good thing to see. I was just wondering if you could give us a bit more information also on, who will be attending from your side, how this will be advertised. Yeah.
So the law enforcement team will conduct surgeries at Hammersmith, Shepherd's Bush and Fulham libraries on the first, second and third Monday of every month. They will be attended by the local ward officers and the local team. These will be advertised on social media and within the library itself and on our webpage.
Thank you. And on the subject of surgeries, I know that we as councillors, we hold regular surgeries, and I know that in some cases, the officers have been asked to try and attend this to ensure the safety of our colleagues. Do you think, just as we did that, we said in July that one of the actions could be for you to reach out to the members and offer a walkabout with them? Do you think perhaps you could also reach out to all the members and tell them that you're available and that they can always reach you so that you can attend the surgeries if they want to?
We can do that if that's a request. By all means, we can. It would be good based on shifts for the ward officers to be at the local surgery, because then they can provide local information about what's been happening. So where practicable, we will try and do that. Thank you.
Thank you. And just one further question. I saw recently that there's an ongoing consultation on responsible dog ownership. I don't know if Neil or Mo, you would like to talk more about this, especially since it's ongoing and members of the public may want to speak about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take this question. So part of the council's sort of armory of options is around public space protection orders. So members might be aware that we've already got a borough-wide street drinking public space protection order. We've got a couple of localised amplification public space protection orders. And the one that we're currently consulting on is the borough-wide dog control order. So the consultation launched at the back end of last week and runs until mid-January. And is seeking feedback and thoughts from a range of partners, i.e. as many constituents as you can help us with, as many residents as we can. We'll be doing weekly work with our comms teams to promote that. And we're consulting on a range of possible prohibitions that the public space protection order might cover. When that consultation closes, we then analyse the data, analyse the figures, and see what the community is saying to us. We then make recommendations, which then go through to Councillor Harvey, and we then go through the relevant democratic processes to get signed off. At the end of that process, should there be a swell of support for it and should we proceed with the PSPO, that will then be enforceable by the LEP, but also our Metropolitan Police colleagues would also have delegated authority to enforce that as well. So far, I think 3 or 4 days in, we are pretty much around 150 responses, which is fantastic. And we hope that over the next sort of 4 or 5 weeks, that number will steadily increase.
Okay, thank you. I see that we have questions from Councillor Apthorpe. Would you like to ask your question?
Yes, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you.
Sorry, we can't hear you. I don't know if that's on our end or...
Not sure.
You want to try now, Councillor Apthorpe? One more attempt, perhaps? Shall we? Yeah, I'm very sorry about this. We will try and sort this out, and if we manage it, or perhaps, and for Councillor Quigley, who I see you also had a question. Apologies. We'll try and sort this out, hopefully for the rest of the agenda, and perhaps if relevant, you can ask them then. Sorry about this.
You want me to come in, Nico?
Are there any other questions from the members present here?
Nico?
No. In that case, are we happy to note the report? Good. Then in that case, we note the report and we can now move on to item 5, which is the progress report on the Gangs, Violence and Exploitation Unit. And I will now ask the changing of the guard with the Gemma Lightfoot from the Gangs, Violence and Exploitation Manager joining the table. Neil, you can stay where you are. And I would also ask Charlie Rigby, founder and CEO of the Violence Intervention Project, Michael Defoe from the Harrow Club, and one of Vanessa McCain or Sarah Lamge for People Arise Now. Thank you. Thank you. Welcome. Shall we begin with Gemma? Once you're ready, feel free to start us off.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the invite to the committee this evening. I'll just take you through the salient points of my report, if that's okay. So, as it says, the Gangs unit were formed in 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. And this was due to the concerning increase in serious youth violence on the borough. The focus of our work is to work with young people between the ages of 10 to 25 years of age. And it's broader than that, though. We work with families affected by serious youth violence and the voluntary and community sector who are present today, and generally residents on the topic of serious youth violence. It is a great credit to our team that last year, due to our success, We were the recipient of the Team of the Year at the Council Star Awards. I manage the unit and we have a dedicated team. We've got Elliot, our analyst, who's in the audience at the moment. We have 4 outreach workers who work with young people, as it says on the tin, to deliver that outreach work, that very specific one-to-one work with those young people, looking at the risk, assessing the risk, helping with risk, and developing aspiration. We also have 2 antisocial behaviour coordinators, and that's a very important part of our work, because as well as supporting young people and families, we do recognise as a unit there is a need and a time for enforcement as well. So we will look at injunctions, criminal behaviour orders, and tenancy action. Our analyst, Elliot, he largely works around providing both proactive and reactive criminal network analysis alongside performance analysis. And he also created our dashboard so that we can provide reports. We also have a policy and service development officer, and they're responsible for the development and implementation of policy initiatives and looking at innovative new ways of working for the unit. And obviously we have our 6 funded police officers funded by the council, and they act on intelligence received with their proactive team colleagues. They provide us with a daily intelligence briefing. They lead and participate in police operation. They lead on the child criminal exploitation reports, and they apply for criminal behaviour orders, and we work in conjunction with them to do that. You'll see our key principles in the report. And as I said, I think that shows the breadth of our work. We're not just working with individuals, we're not just doing enforcement, but we're doing that very important early intervention work within the community. We want to prevent serious youth violence. I think it's a real credit to the team, moving on to our KPIs and what we've achieved. Since we've been established, we've developed and hosted awareness sessions, which have been delivered to 937 people. That can be presentations to Year 6 pupils, giving them a very gentle introduction about gangs, violence and exploitation, where to seek help, what it means. But also we've developed a presentation for parents and carers. What are the signs to look out for? Again, what is gangs, violence and exploitation? And more importantly, where you can seek help. Again, I'm very proud that we have and fund a detached outreach programme, which Michael from Harrow Club will talk to you about. And since that has been created, that has been able to reach out to just under 1,500 young people. So we meet on a fortnightly basis with our ASB, police, youth justice and child exploitation lead colleagues. And we really look at where there are young people congregating, potentially they're just not causing any crime or antisocial behaviour, but they may be being exploited. So by going out late at night, in the afternoon, whenever it's needed, detached outreach are there for them. You will see the KPIs that relate to violence and crime in the community. I think it's very important to note that the data that is provided here, it's data very broadly. We're not talking about all of the young people that we work with. This is everyone in the community. So when we look at what's happening with our KPIs, we want to reduce the number of violent crimes committed by young people. And you'll see that there was 251 non-domestic violence, assault with injury, serious wounding or murder offences committed by young people aged between 10 and 24 from October 2021 to September 2022. And I think when I point out at paragraph 25, what that means, we are seeing a great deal of positivity. For example, after a spate of 3 murders of young people in our borough in 2019, there's not been a murder of a young person on our borough since February 2021, which is pretty incredible. When we look at our other KPI to reduce the number of robberies committed by young people, when we look at the information at paragraph 26, we can see that what we've achieved is it's 26% lower than the previous 12 months and 46% lower than the 12-month period before that. And when we're looking at reducing the number of drug-related offences committed by young people, again, the evidence in paragraph 28 leads us to see that there is a 20% lower than the previous 12 months and 32% lower than the 12-month period before that. And we want to reduce the number and seriousness of injuries caused by youth violence, and the data at paragraph 30 explicitly shows that. We are in a difficult time with data though, because as you will, that's okay. Because as you would have seen, and as I've discussed, we were introduced in the pandemic. So as you will quickly realise, the pandemic had a big knock-on effect on crime figures. I think it's really important, as I said, to look at the broader scope of our work. So when we look at our operational work and what we've developed, for example, at paragraph 34, we developed a vulnerability tracker. We recognised in Hammersmith and Fulham with our youth justice colleagues who are sat here, the police and children's services, that there is a clear trajectory for young people who are affected by gangs, violence and exploitation. And therefore, if we create a vulnerability tracker at the very early stages, we can then identify those young people and work with them at the earliest opportunity, looking very much at our prevention arm of our work. So we look at children, and what we look at is subcategories, you know, the welfare of that young person. Are they a victim of crime? Are they committing criminal behaviour? Are they involved in county lines and other risk factors? And by looking and assessing those categories, we can then deem who needs our help at what stage. It's been hugely positive. There's been hugely positive feedback from our partners, and that the tracker is welcomed and impressive. Our projects are really important to us as a team. I've commented on the detached outreach project, and I'll leave Michael to talk to you further about that. But I think one of our biggest pieces of work to talk about is where we successfully bid to the violence reduction unit at MOPAC for £68,000 worth of funding. And we chose the area of South Fulham to target because at that point in time, we were seeing really serious concerns around youth violence. We work with Harrow Club and ASHE in the voluntary and community sector to develop that initiative and respond to the community. So we've empowered the community to utilise Sands End's Arts and Community Centre, which when we met with parents and carers there, they said they felt detached from. We have weekly coffee mornings there with parents and carers. They've found this a safe space to talk, and we then meet with them monthly, and we've developed themed topics around housing, antisocial behaviour, hate crime, as well as talking to them about gangs, violence and exploitation. The funding has also allowed for us to fund the Late Night Youth Project on a Friday night at Sands End Youth Club, again delivered by Harrow Club. I've also come up with a really amazing initiative, which is the Rebel Records project. So a parent carer told us about Rebel Records in South Fulham, and young people did want to work and understand the music industry and develop their music. So the studio is set in South Fulham. It's state of the art. We have completed a 10-week program that runs Saturday all day for a group of 5 young people. And I have to say, these are 5 young people who we were really concerned about. They were sometimes found with weapons. They were on that trajectory that we were very concerned about. For them to be going to Late Night Project on a Friday, 9 till midnight, lift home facility, having food, having mentoring, and then going on to Saturday all day, keeping them safe off the streets, I think has definitely led to our community and them being safer in South Fulham. They were really committed to the project. We have put them onto phase 2. They've learned all aspects of music, such as production, engineering, writing, marketing and management. We've put them onto phase 2 and they're about to go on to phase 3. And as Councillor Harvey will be aware, and other members here sat at the table, we allowed them to launch their music. They promoted 3 tracks at another music studio just last Monday to great success. We've also funded a residential for young people by Harrow Club in October half term. And what we use this for as well is a listening session where we listen to young people. What do you want in the community? What can we fund next for you in the project? That is best practice. There's no point in putting on a project if they're not interested. So now we have listened to them, and we're going to work with another one of our partners, Lyceum Gym, to develop the project that they now want. Due to the success of that project, we received an additional £25,000 from the Violence Reduction Unit to carry on with it. Again, in our project work, we worked really hard around Notting Hill Carnival and Bank Holiday Weekend. We recognise that it's a critical time for our young people, especially with Carnival being live and running for the first time after the pandemic. We led on the partnership work to identify children and adults who we would have concerns about attending Carnival. And we, as well as identifying them, we tasked named practitioners to have conversations with the young people about their attendance at Carnival and have that safety conversation with them. And additionally, we funded a project on the Bank Holiday Monday in conjunction with our colleagues at People Arise Now, whereby young people attended a FIFA Challenge event and watched a film and had a discussion afterwards. Again, it's all about keeping young people away from areas of danger, but actually participating in something they're genuinely interested in. Over that Bank Holiday weekend, we also utilised Harrow Club for additional sessions of the late night project to run on the Saturday and Sunday, and an additional youth club sessions to run at White City Youth Club. Again, putting on events that we know they're genuinely interested in and therefore keep safe. I think, again, project-wise, we have recently completed a campaign with Crime Stoppers youth brand, which is called Fearless. The aim of the campaign was to encourage and persuade young members of the community to speak up and report crime. It's a very scary thing for an adult, yet alone a young person, to do. So Fearless, for example, has a heavy social media presence. So it is about informing young people via Spotify, Instagram, about how they can report crime. We utilised our youth mayor as an ambassador for the campaign, and he released an advert on those social media sites to encourage reporting within LBHF. We were talking about women and girls earlier, and obviously that's a really key part of the work of the Gangs, Violence and Exploitation Unit. So we successfully bid for some further money, which was match funded within our unit. And this funding was allocated to the Women and Girls Network, which is another voluntary community sector organisation, for a project to work with women and girls to discuss violence and exploitation concerns and advise them where they can seek support and help. So that has happened both within community and educational settings. Our future work, again, we are now have plans underway to work with another partner, Gloves Not Guns. This is to put in place 2 sport and dance activities in White City and a further dance and wellbeing project for parents and carers, because we recognise we have to work with parents and carers, not just young people, to tackle this problem. And also what we are going to be focusing on, as I said, a lot of our KPIs look at violence in the wider community, not just within the GVU sector. And we are concerned about that as a team and as part of the wider community safety team. So I think it's going to be very interesting when the legislation comes into force in the future with regards to the serious violence duty. And we will be part of that conversation where we're looking at, well, if there is concerns about an increase in violence that isn't GVEU related, we need to be part of that conversation and use our expertise with our colleagues to tackle it. And that's my report and my salient points. I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Gemma. That was very informative and very glad to hear about the success of the service. And as you said, the challenges you faced over, well, since you started during the pandemic. Before questions, I'd just like to move on to our other guests. And Michael, would you like to go first?
Yes, good evening, everybody. Obviously, the Harrow Clubs is a charity, and we recognise that addressing the serious youth violence with all communities, because we work in both boroughs, both in Hammersmith and Fulham and RBKC. And I must commend the borough of Hammersmith and Fulham, because they recognise they do or may have a gangs issue, whereas RBKC do not. So they do not have a gangs unit. And as a result, I think it's been instrumental for the work that we've done in terms of addressing serious youth violence amongst young people. And as Gemma said, you know, early intervention is probably one of the key aspects of stopping the stem of serious youth violence. And as a result, I think all the work that we've done over the past, probably since 2018, by setting up our Another Way project, which is a late night project, has been instrumental in seeing less deaths and less serious youth violence incidents in both boroughs, but particularly in Hammersmith and Fulham at Sands End Youth Club, which is Imperial Wharf. There's been major issues around there, and it's young people coming from other sides of the borough, like over in Chelsea, just by Chelsea, Willesden Estate, having a lot of impact with the Imperial young people. And there's been a feud for many years, as people don't know. And there's been some serious knife incidents over that area. So for us, creating a Sands End Youth Club, which runs from 9 p.m. till midnight for those young people on Imperial Wharf, is vital and critical in our work going forward in terms of just stemming the flow where young people will be at those critical times. So, you know, we run Another Way projects in RBKC, but mainly, obviously, in Sands End. Also, just to complement this, we do the detach and outreach work in around that area, White City Estate, all the key areas where we've seen the fluctuation of young people either congregating or there's been major issues. So my team will go out when there's been a major issue or it's a hot spot where residents or young people are in fear of their lives, or there could be potential repercussions of an incident that's happened again, because that's what normally happens. Someone gets stabbed, then someone else wants to go and get stabbed. So it's like a recurring theme, but unfortunately, you know, maybe the police might not be there, maybe there might not be officers available to go on those spots. But my team will actually go out and engage the young people, maybe who have been involved in this issue, okay? And hopefully mediate between what's going on between gangs and young people and hopefully stop it at source. Also, we're talking about targeted mentoring, because I think with all the work that we do, we recognize that we can't do it in isolation. Okay, we're a charity. We cannot afford to send groups of our workers outside. We can't afford to train them up so they can engage the most challenging and violent young people in these boroughs. So, you know, it's really important that we do work in partnership, not only with Gemma, but also with Charlie here from VIP. It's so important that we make sure that we support each other in addressing this issue of serious youth violence. So the targeted mentoring is, again, engaging young people that are on the spectrum of maybe at risk themselves or being vulnerable of joining a gang or considering perpetrating serious youth violence against one another. So for us, it's so important that we recognize that our work is a collective responsibility, not just ours. It's a collective responsibility if we want to change and see successes that Gemma's seen over the last few years for all the work that we've been doing. And a lot of this work is pathways to earn employment. So, you know, it's not only about stop killing each other, stop fighting and stuff like that. It's about, you know, there are other options for you. And if we want them to stop, then we've got to provide opportunities for them to stop and environments where they can stop and maybe take a breath and think about what they're doing. Because, you know, my thing about working with a lot of these young people, if they're willing to perpetrate serious youth violence and they've lost hope, then you know, they're liable to do anything at certain situations and they're not thinking about what they're actually doing. But when you talk about remorse and when you see, you know, when you do get a chance to engage with them and say, well, why did you do it? I don't know. Or this was happening at home. So it's, you know, as far as I was concerned, from 2018, I could see this problem getting worse rather than better unless we intervened and started these kind of projects. So it's really, really important that we continue this type of work and do it collaboratively.
Thank you, Michael. And I should say thank you for the information you submitted to us. Unfortunately, we didn't have time to add it to the report, but it was very helpful and very useful background for everyone in the committee. And we'll go to questions after that. Charlie from the Violence Intervention Project, would you like to go next?
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for having me. So to give you a bit of background about the Violence Intervention Project, really, the project probably started, what are we now, 14, 15 odd years ago with the murder of Kojo Yenga. If any of you remember that back in Hammersmith Grove back in 2007. that led to a post being brought about in 2010 in Hammersmith, Fulham, that I started on the street outreach service. And over a 7-year period, I started working there. And over those years, really came to the conclusion that what was needed was a much more therapeutic way of working with young people. Really, the cornerstone of the charity is the notion that shame is the catalyst of violence. And what I was seeing over those early years on the borough is that young people were, you know, that their way of verbalizing violence was always about being disrespected or violated. But ultimately, what they were talking about was they'd been shamed, they'd been made to feel small. And their way of dealing with those emotions was to shame other people through violence or social media. And actually, I kind of got to the point, I'd started doing some training at the Tavistock and Portman Clinic. And I'd kind of reached a point where my belief was very much around how do we create something with a level of autonomy, but also with all the kind of the necessary therapeutic elements put into it. So the charity was set up in 2017, I think I remember rightly. So we're about 5.5 years down the line now. We talked a lot in the report about how Hammersmith is very much our home, and it very much was. It was where I started off the work. And it's been our base ever since we started off. Originally with the former Director of Children's Services, Steve Miley, funding us in the first kind of 6 to 8 months, and then through funding through the Mayor's Office and so on. We built a team. We now have regular clinical supervision on a weekly basis, either doing practice development or direct supervision, or as we now coin the term, shame-informed practice, and building that as a team. And I think you probably see from our report, there is some other work in other boroughs now, which I think has been really important, because the entire, 12 years I've been in the borough, there's always been a crossover into other neighbouring boroughs. You know, we've always had issues going on with Hayes at one point. We've got prominent young people coming in from places like Harrow. So the necessity to be able to actually go in to those other boroughs is really important. And I think there's a few of our cases that we've started off with in Hammersmith, and they've moved into either Ealing or Hounslow. With the funding we've had from places like the Violence Reduction Unit and the Young Londoners Fund, it's meant we can carry on working those people into those other boroughs. I think going forwards, you know, you know, ever since the early days, we were always part of things like the Ending Gang Violence Exploitation Panel, which has been a huge, you know, benefit to us to feel part of that. As Michael was saying, and as Gemma spoke about, the need to work in partnership is always there. You know, we can't work in silos. We can't work just individually. And without naming other boroughs, we have certainly gone into some other boroughs where very much people are working in those silos, and I've always been perhaps a little bit biased, but always very conscious of how many great organisations there are on the borough, but also how well people kind of aim to work in a partnership and collaboratively. Certainly for us going forwards, one of our main concerns is with young people kind of moving on into like their later adolescence, into their 20s, how we start to see young people moving away from perhaps more street violence, gang related behaviour, but actually the trauma and all the damage that, you know, ultimately we're dealing with, you know, in our work is quite often comes about in other ways. So for example, things like drug and alcohol addiction, gambling, suicidal ideation as well. Those are other elements. So I think for us moving forwards, as much as securing more and more funding for the over 18 area as well of work that we do, but it's also looking at how we partner up with other organisations so that young people who, for some of them now, we've had relationships for 3-4 years, and they are starting to make that move away from the lifestyle, but other things start to become the issue, you know. Yeah, I think most other things are probably in the report. I didn't want to really go into that too much, but add a bit of stuff that there isn't always space to fit into one of these in.
Thank you, Charlie. And again, thank you for the very useful report. And I should say that the initial idea to have this meeting and to discuss this came after having a chat with you back in June or July, I think, during a meeting organized by People Rise Now. And, you know, I'm very grateful to all of you for, you know, introducing me to this and coming here today to talk about this. You're all doing great work, and it's good to have you here. Shall we move on to questions? Councillor Dinsmore.
Thank you. If I may just begin with a massive heartfelt thank you for all the hard work that you do. I was actually mugged with a machete to my face in May earlier this year, and I faced the people who did it about a month ago in court, and one of them was 21 years old. He had 26 convictions. He couldn't read or write. He was actually out on license for robbery when he did mine. And the work you do is so incredibly important in changing people's lives. Growing up in Belfast as well, people were redirected away from paramilitaries through exactly the sort of work that you're doing. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you to begin with, because it is absolutely vital. If I may just ask a couple of very brief questions. The first is just the precise role of the council funded police. I mean, there's an intelligence aspect which helps to inform gathering information. And you mentioned some police-led operations. It'd just be helpful if you could explain how that fits more generally with the Met and what they're doing, or just going into a bit more detail on the police's role would be really helpful.
Yeah, sure, not a problem. And I think Charlie will definitely be able to assist with this and back me up. As outreach workers in our teams, you can imagine that we get a lot of intelligence that we can pass on very sensitively to the police. A lot of the time, young people are telling us things. You're not telling us for no reason. You're telling us because you want something done to stop, a bit like the Fearless campaign. So, for example, a number of police operations have arisen on this borough as a result of intelligence, not only coming from us, but law enforcement team, the gas compliance team, Charlie's team are also working with young people in the same way that we do. Those operations have led to the closure of county lines, have led to properties being closed down under closure order legislation, therefore feeding into the whole probably Met's policy around gang violence and exploitation, of which county lines is one of those topics that they seek to resolve and take action on. Also, as I said in my report, our police gangs team, our officers, they hold the criminal exploitation report. So where a young person on our borough is believed to be being exploited, I think that's where we've seen real value in our collaboration with the police, where we have such close links with children's services, youth justice, to know there's a police officer sat in the same building as children's services and youth justice who is holding that criminal exploitation report, which normally has probably 8 to 10 professionals working with that young person and their family, I think has really enhanced the response to those criminal exploitation cases. So that's just a flavour of how we work with the Met and their overall initiatives, if that helps.
Yeah, it's very helpful. Thank you very much. And just one other brief question. You noted paragraph 60, concern about South Fulham and White City areas. I just wonder if you could expand briefly on why those two specific areas are of concern. Thank you.
So when we got our capacity building grant, which I touched upon, the £68,000 funding, what was outlined by the Violence Reduction Unit is that we had to utilise that in a specific area. And at that point in time, as Michael was talking about, we were seeing a clear pattern of serious youth violence and intelligence around that, of young people being found in those blocks. And basically it was a corridor of violence from, I would say, Sullivan Court, if you know the area, going across Town Mead Road, all the way across to Imperial Wharf. And then, as Michael identified, you would see activity going across to World's End, which is just across the border into Kensington and Chelsea. So this is where we really thought this is something we can tackle with an early intervention piece of work. But when I say early intervention, it's gone way beyond that. You know, what I'm detailing there is late night projects, getting parents and carers in every week into a coffee morning. It's been phenomenal. So that's why we identified that area. And White City, I worked on White City for a decade, tackling serious antisocial behaviour. And what you'll see with White City, in common with many other areas, there's peaks and troughs when there's concerns around gangs, violence and exploitation. And we had a team away day, and with our police colleagues, we're one team, and using our intelligence, our data, information, we are now wanting to concentrate there. You may be aware that there was 2 firearm discharges in that area. Fortunately, no one was hurt, no one was injured, but that is where we definitely need to seek more intelligence, work with the police, work with the community. And for example, Kieran, our policy and service development officer, she's attending a meeting with the community on White City as we speak this evening, to look at an innovative way to tackle serious youth violence. So that is why it's quite hard to focus on all the areas at the same time. So that's why we're now moving on to White City. But for example, we are holding events in West Kensington as well. So that's why we've identified those areas.
Thank you very much. That's been really helpful. And Charlie, thanks.
Can I just add to that first point? We often have a real hard balance around building trusting relationships with young people, young adults who we're trying to work with and engage and build trust over a long period of time with, but then also becoming privy to information that can sometimes compromise that trust. I can't really express how lucky we are in Hammersmith to have not only Gemma and her team, but also a police unit who understand that balance that we're trying to strike, and how the information that is sometimes passed on can be dealt with in a really sensitive way. And, you know, there have been plenty of experiences in the past where information is passed, it's completely damaged relationships, and actually probably longer term stop people from being safe as they could have been. And it's pretty unique to the borough to have that.
Thanks.
Thank you both. Any other questions? Councillor Miri.
Yeah, just to echo what Councillor Dinsmore said, thank you very much for the work that you do. It's very much appreciated. As you were talking, Gemma, I was thinking the question that popped into my mind was about sort of psychological and therapeutic work that's done, because so often, you know, for lay people, we're thinking about this issue and we're not thinking that there are children really at the heart of this who have been through traumatic experiences. And I was reading something about this. I would never use this word, but it's a similar project in America. And the person that led it said the word thug stands for traumatized human unable to grieve. And that really resonated with me. So would you be able to speak a bit more about how exactly you engage with young people from a therapeutic kind of standpoint, or any of you? Thank you.
Yeah, so for me, the initial idea of this came from a couple of people, one from the States called James Gilligan, who spoke about, he's probably got 50 years experience in the prison estate over there now. But he was the first person that really coined the idea that, you know, he'd never seen an act of violence that wasn't shame related. And it's really about how young people growing up being traumatized ultimately left feeling with these feelings of being quite unloved. And therefore, I mean, we talk about it as lowest self-esteem as well, essentially. But if you're carrying around high levels of shame, your ability to have the resilience necessary to deal with a perceived shame is going to be really low, because you're already quite heightened to that. Now, shame doesn't work by me sitting here and talking about this, and I sit here and think, they all think I'm an absolute idiot and they don't know what I'm talking about. Now, of course, that may not be the case, but if I feel like that, I would experience the shame. And for people who have that experience, it's very easy to become very quiet and not talk about those feelings. So for our work, when I talked earlier, a few moments ago about the necessity to build trust, sometimes be quite vulnerable ourselves in the work that we're doing with young people, because if they can't talk about their vulnerabilities, then shame keeps itself very hidden away and will eat away at somebody's self-esteem. And if they can't talk about, and it may not be necessarily issues that have happened in their childhood, it may not be the issues that happened a couple of weeks ago in whatever the event was, but to have a trusting relationship with an adult where they can start to offload some of that and work their way through some of it is a definite part of that process. As an organisation, we've signed up to the Anna Freud Centre AMBIT training, which is adaptive mentalisation-based integrative treatment, also known as AMBIT. I guess the major part of that is it's a model for organisations to use working with quite challenging groups. It was originally adolescent, but then they changed it to adaptive. And the idea is that you use mentalising, which is a technique that we try and get our workers to use as well, where people think about perhaps how they've behaved and how that might be viewed by other people. but equally how they're being made to feel and how actually sometimes people, don't mean to make you feel that way. It's trying to get the kind of putting the lens, is the lens isn't maybe the right word, but certainly looking at it from other people's perspectives. And that's called mentalizing. Anna Freud has huge data around the ability to mentalize and how that actually, that correlates with being able to have healthy, safe relationships and go on and do that. Look, I think for me, most of us are pretty lucky after a really bad day at work. We can go home and talk to our other half or our parents or our best friend and just lay it all out there. A lot of the young people we have don't have that ability to go home and talk to people who would just be there and listen. And that's, if I wanted to pass on anything, that's kind of the most important nugget. Work with young people, just be there and be able to listen without making them feel that they're being judged in any way. Just be there and be open.
To that, yeah, Charlie's quite right. But as well with that, I think it's important that the teams that we work with, the first thing we did when we started probably the Another Way project, every single one of us, including myself, we done trauma-informed training. And that was key for everybody to be on the same level in terms of, because we've already built up really good relationships as youth workers and youth practitioners with the young people. But this is another area in which, you do need some kind of expertise. You do need training and understanding when a young person has been traumatized through certain incidents. And part of that is being shamed and the shame game. So until we understand that side of it, we won't be able to address any of this work whatsoever. And you need a trained team to be able to do this. Yeah.
And just to add, we're all on the same page. So my team, including myself, have also received trauma-informed training to have a trauma-informed approach, which is in my report, and a systemic way of thinking as well, which is in my report. I think it's incredibly important, as Michael and Charlie have said, unless you understand that about young people and also yourself, how can you take that journey forward? And I'm sure Charlie and Michael have the same. We have now young people coming to us, saying to our outreach workers, you're the most trusted person in my life. And these are people with mums, but life is very, very tough at home. And it goes back to the vulnerability tracker. These children who are being exploited or young adults that are now maybe perpetrating, none of them have come from really lovely home lives. They've been through so much as children from an early age. And that's why on the vulnerability tracker, we look at items like, have they experienced domestic abuse as a child? That heavily feeds into their psyche, and you do not recover from witnessing your mother, your father, your carer, experiencing any form of abuse. And we see that quite often. So, and if you've been exploited when you're 13 or 14 and the abuse that you've had to endure in a trap house, it plays with you again for many, many years. And based on what we're learning as a unit, we are now looking to implement a mental health practitioner in our unit, because what we are definitely seeing is the effect on young people's mental health. And unless they are able to, a lot of them don't feel comfortable going down your normal conventional routes like contact in mind or going to see their GP. It's way too much with the trauma they're already coping with. So by having a mental health practitioner, hopefully in our team, if we just cross over that bridge, that will enable them to have that rapid conversation, again, with a trusted partner. If we're saying this person sits within our team, they're trusted, let's go and speak to them as the first steps. That's where we're seeing, that hand holding could eventually lead to them feeling comfortable to engage with more enhanced services.
Thank you. If I can just ask a quick follow-up. Obviously, maybe this is the stage before the stage that you all would get involved, but often I feel like there's a very fine line between young people socializing and gathering outside, at least in the minds of some people, and antisocial behavior or criminal activity. And again, I'm not an expert, but I feel like most of the time it's innocent, and that kind of, if it's just an innocent gathering or multiple innocent gatherings, the repeated approaches by law enforcement could actually be the thing that triggers alienation. So how sensitively do you have to approach that? How do you deal with that? Is that something that, you know, what would you have to say about that? Thank you.
I think that's very much where the detached outreach project comes in. And I think you've hit upon a really pertinent point. I definitely experienced it when I worked on White City. Young people innocently hanging around on their doorsteps. Why not? You should be entitled to do that. But what you have to remember is the exploiter may be watching, knowing when you hang around, comes over and, oh, let's go to Westfield, let me go and buy you a Gucci belt. And therefore you're already in debt to that person. So this is why I think detached outreach at that ASB level is so important, because what Michael and his team do so well is with that young people who are hanging around, especially on a dark night when it's raining, no, come to youth club instead, or in the summer months, let's go and have a game of basketball. And just them beginning to have those conversations can rapidly change just hanging around, which again, some people do not see it as just hanging around when there's quite a lot of noise. But I think it works both ways for the resident who might be slightly anxious and for the young person who might be quite bored. Get into a positive activity at an early stage can make things so much better for you further down the line. And I think, you know, by having these early intervention projects, don't get me wrong, with Rebel Records project, we have some young people who we're very concerned about, but also other people that are now coming onto the project. Again, they've just been hanging around. Oh yeah, we'd like to get involved in music. And again, it's that creating that safe feeling of community, resilience, knowing who to reach out to. Like for example, in opposite William Morris Sixth Form at Margarine Cemetery, a lot of young people were congregating there after college. Some of them were actually experiencing grief after a very traumatic incident in 2019. And by sending detached outreach down there to speak to them, they are now, detached outreach are now really trusted, valued members of their community to them. So they can go in and speak to them. It's all about making that young person feel safe and knowing where to turn to. So I would completely agree with you. We need to get in there early so you don't feel alienated. It's not just police coming to hassle you or residents go, move away from my back garden. It's actually come here, come join in something positive with us. So Michael, I don't know whether you'd agree with that.
I think with the detached and outreach, we recognise that not every young person wants to come to a youth club. Or, you know, we might not have everything that a young person wants in a youth club. So therefore, you know, being out on the streets and engaging with those young people that in their own kind of environment is essential. We've done it all throughout lockdown. We didn't stop. We've done it all throughout lockdown when young people refused to wear masks and decided, I'm not staying inside, I'm going downstairs in the block or whatever it might be. We still engage with those young people and we carry that right the way through. And what we've found is that through detached and outreach, then we can encourage young people to go and do positive activities, whether it be Rebel Records, whether it be to the youth club, whether it be to late night. And so it's no good just going and speaking to these young people and say, look, stop hanging around and the neighbours are fed up of you lot shouting and screaming, playing your music and stuff like that. Why don't you go? We have to give them an alternative. So it's about assigning them to different pathways. So to encourage them to do positive things with their time, if you like. But at the same time, engage with them if they are just sitting down having a chat, because it's the best environment in the world just to get to know them and build those kind of really positive relationships that will last for years and could be life-changing for some of those young people. So it's so important.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Charlie.
You were kind of asking about the police at the start of that. And I think if you consider a group of pretty innocent kids hanging about an estate somewhere and they have decent enough relationships with local police who come around, community policing, they're seen regularly, they have a relationship with them. And then another group of kids comes onto their estate and robs them. If you've got a good relationship with the police, then you're probably more likely to turn to the police. There's probably going to be some voices there saying, no, we're going to go deal with this. But if you've had really bad experiences with police, which way are you more likely to turn? So I do think there is, you know, from what you initially said, there is a real need for community policing to come back in, where young people can build relationships with them so that if those types of things happen, then which way they're more likely to turn.
On that note, I should say that one good example I saw is from People Arise Now organizing a football game in Sutton between young people in the area and the local police force. Maybe that is something that, we could consider, since we may not have community policing anytime soon, but we can organize this sort of activities and do that.
We've just arranged it.
Success already. Yeah. No. Yes.
I just want to say actually that in my walkabouts with the local enforcement teams, I've really seen the kind of, the seeds of community policing coming up in the Bainey estate in my ward. And, shout out to Babatunde and Narinda, who are the two LET officers for my ward. I went on a walkabout with them, and Bainey estate is, sometimes an ASB hotspot area. And I don't think the police really feel comfortable engaging with the young people on the estate. Or vice versa, either way. And before we went into the estate, Babatunde and Narinda were telling me, we have a really good relationship with the young people on this estate, and they trust us. And, they can tell us things, we can have that relationship with them and say, maybe you shouldn't be doing this. And it's really trusting. And I was thinking, okay, this is, propaganda and I'm never going to see this. We walk into the estate, it's like they'd set it up. Almost as soon as we walked in, Baba, Narinda, they're shouting from across the estate. They came over. They had a really kind of like friendly relationship with those officers. And I was thinking, this is exactly what community policing should be. I mean, I hesitate to even use the word policing. It was just kind of like, mentorship almost. So yeah, that really resonates. Yeah.
Yes, and perhaps it is something that we need to, as the LET service evolves, working with the partners that the rest of the community safety team are working would be perhaps one way of doing it, so that it really becomes a complementary force as well to the police in that way as well. Maybe that is a takeaway out of this meeting. I can see Councillor Apthorpe has a question. Hopefully we can hear her.
Hello?
Yes, we cannot. Let me see. Perhaps one way of doing it, so that there's a delay on my laptop, but if we just wait, I don't know how to do this. If you just text me your, or Bathsheba, your question, and we can ask it for you. Until then, I have a question for all our three contributors. Well, basically three questions, headlines, really quick sentences. What is your proudest achievement as part of your work? What is the one thing that if you had all the resources in the world, you would like to introduce, whether it's a project or a service or something? And three, what's something that you would like us as a council to be doing more on, something that you would like us to improve? And, please be candid and forthright in your answers. Michael, if you want to go first, and we'll work our way down the table.
Okay. Yeah, continue doing detaching outreach work. I think that's probably one of our most valuable things, and the late night. If we had loads of money, I would like you to set up some kind of residential centre where we can take these young people out of their own environments and work with them intensively over a period of time, because I think that's one of the key pieces of work where you can have a great impact over a weekend or over a week with young people. When we just finished our residential at the last half term, and it was so impactful, and we had the young people talking about how they carried a knife and why they carried a knife and why they wouldn't carry a knife now. So those pieces of work are vital if we had loads of money. And one thing I think the council need to do is invest in the young people, especially within the youth service, because apparently, we're all being cut by 50%. So maybe the 3 youth clubs that we have in Sands End, White City, and over in Fulham, then, that's going to be an impact on our work, and it's going to make our work even more challenging when it comes to youth clubs being shut, or we lose that kind of relationship that we've built over probably for the last 8 or 10 years that we've been running youth clubs in this borough. So that is going to have a major impact. So I'd like the councillors to really consider how you address that. Thank you.
Thank you. Charlie?
I'm just trying to think how I can make this a short story. Quite important what we're talking about this evening. We had a piece of work with a young female who had been exploited by a well-known older gang member who'd basically left a gun in her room. She was found with it. Police went in, found the gun, and she was arrested for it. We always thought they were going to drop the charges eventually, and she wouldn't give up who it was. She was too scared. She had bleach thrown in her face. She was kidnapped. And we helped her get off the borough. We had to do things like we had to get the car swept for a tracker. It was that serious. And I remember meeting them on the bottom of the M1 with the car, all swept, all safe. They had a van. We took them up. We had an ex-police officer, Doris, sitting on the road watching the house when they were packing everything up. Got her up out of London. It was all great. We all thought everything was great. And then she got charged with firearm, which was a 5-year minimum. And we had a great barrister team who eventually got her into court, and an amazing judge who could see very clearly she'd been exploited and kind of asked me what he should give her. So she ended up with a £600 fine. And it was just an amazing outcome that she'd been so trusting with us and invested so much in us. And yeah, that was great. I can't remember the other two questions. What were the other two questions?
Something you would like us to improve on, or that if you had all the resource in the world, or that if we had all the resource in the world, you would like to happen?
Well, not in a nutshell. This is long-term work. You know, I think Gemma's done amazing work, especially under the circumstances of it all kicking off during the pandemic. But this is long-term. There will be periods where, like I recall, when I set the charity up, moped crime had just become the priority. And about a year after that, we had 3 fatal stabbings on the borough. So there will be periods when it looks like it's getting quiet, but it will just be around the next corner. And if we don't carry on investing year after year after year, we will have some really awful years ahead of us. So both of those questions, it's about the long-term investment in things like GVEU, the work Harrow Club is doing, the work we're doing, work other people in the room are doing as well. It's long-term.
Thank you, Charlie. Gemma, if you'd like to say
I
something.
think our proudest piece of work is what I've mentioned earlier, working with those group of young males and their parents, carers in South Fulham. I genuinely believe, although we'll never be able to prove it, and Elliot and I talk about this all the time, we won't be able to prove that they would have been murdered. We won't be able to prove that they would have stabbed someone. But we all genuinely believe as a group of professionals, which I think says a lot, that without our intervention, it would be a very different situation for those young boys and their families. The effect on families of violence cannot be underestimated. It is huge, particularly for siblings as well. So we have moved some of those young people and they're thriving. Some families have chosen to stay, which I think is incredible as well. Why should you move from your home? You should be able to thrive and prosper where you live. And they now are, and they are safe, and they reach out to us when there is a problem. So we're incredibly proud of that group of young boys as a unit. And they are now beginning to feel proud of themselves, as was witnessed last Monday, that from being hunched up and, you know, that sort of language to now standing proud. I introduce them to my colleagues and friends and they shake hands. It's a different situation to a year and a half ago. Yeah, in an ideal world, I'd have a bigger team. I would have procurement and commissioning as part of my team. There is so much money available for us out there. As I said, we've brought in £68,000 plus 25,000 for one project. It's very much, you can only bring in the money in that you can spend and do it properly. But we could bring a lot of money in based on our success so far, but we'd need more members in the team to do that. And I completely agree with Charlie. You know, we need a long-term service. I believe we're already seeing the reward in the KPIs that we've demonstrated. But again, completely agree with Charlie. We can never underestimate what's around the corner. But as long as we won't be beginning to see the impact our early intervention is having for quite some time. So that's why we need it to be a long-term service, or else it's not value for money if we don't invest this early intervention piece as a long-term piece of work.
Thank you, Gemma, and thank you to everyone who raised the fact that this needs to be a long-term service and a long-term investment, which I think having you here helps us recognize the importance of having it and demonstrates to all of us why we should be and why we will be making sure that this is a long-term investment and a priority for us as a council. Through the magic of technology, we now have Councillor Apthorpe's question, which Bathsheba will read out.
Thank you, Chair. So Councillor Apthorpe, thank you. Councillor Apthorpe has made this comment in the chat. Firstly, I just wanted to say that I'm really pleased to see that some of the funding has gone towards a project run by women and girls, and I'm sure that will come to the item later on, not only because they're a fantastic organisation, but also because the question of how and why girls are involved in crime is often forgotten when we discuss youth crime. And it's really important that we have an organisation awareness of the overlap between things like sexual violence, domestic violence and female offending. If anyone has any comments on that topic, I'd be very interested. Her main question is this: past tracking schemes run by larger institutions in regard to crime, particularly youth crime, have had a serious impact in terms of privacy. I was wondering whether you could provide any reassurance about how young people's privacy is still being respected in these tracking schemes. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. I completely agree. And all of the colleagues that have fed into the vulnerability tracker have given this great consideration. We have followed GDPR rules. We have got privacy impact assessments that we've held. And I think I should make it very clear, this is a vulnerability tracker, not a matrix. It's not a gangs violence matrix. This is something that we believe will identify young people that are vulnerable to gangs violence and exploitation, and enabled us to see that there is a clear plan, there is a clear way ahead for them. And if there isn't, for the practitioner who is currently working with them, whether they be from youth justice or family support or Harrow Club or VIP or People Arise Now, that we can say, well, what help can we give? So we have, dotted our I's, crossed our T's, and I would just reiterate, it is not a matrix, it's a vulnerability tracker. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Yeah, Councillor Dinsmore.
Sorry, and very briefly, to what extent do you see the glorification of violence, both in film and music, and, for example, zombie knives, machetes? Is that a big problem that's come out? Do people just think violence is cool? I know you mentioned shame and it's a reaction to shame. Do they go down the violence route because it's so well advertised? Is that part of the problem?
I mean, I think, I grew up, you think about films you watched growing up. For me, Lethal Weapon, Die Hard, there was always a point at the beginning of the movie where the main character gets shamed by the bad guy. And there's always a point at the end of the movie where he gets him back. So that's kind of deep rooted into our psyches. So I don't think it's the only issue. I think then if you grow up in a life of, abuse, neglect, ultimately trauma, more shame, then actually those things start to become a kind of a reality for you. What we have now, though, is this world where so much real violence, if we call it that, rather than, Hollywood violence, real violence is available on screen, and just so readily available with no care in the world for what age people are, from being able to see that. So there's no doubt things are very different from when I was growing up. And it's far more extreme now. But there's also another, there's thousands of other people seeing that violent content as well who aren't being violent. But the people we're working with, as kind of Gemma said, like, you look at the life stories of those people we're working with, there's a different element. It doesn't help. It doesn't help at all.
And just to add to that, I've done a podcast with young people who could wear masks and actually express themselves, called The Masked Truth. And a lot of those young people said why they perpetrated serious youth violence against each other was because it's happened to them and it's come from the household as well. So, when they talk about video games and the music industry and, genres of music in terms of rap music and so on, I think a lot of the young people can take some kind of inspiration from it, but at the same time, it's not the sole root of the problem. So, it's inflicted for their own experiences. And as Charlie said, social media's got a big part to play in this, where you can see a young person get punched in the face or someone being hit without any filter. So, they can see these readily. And when you talk about being probably mugged yourself with a machete and so forth for that young person, and he was only 21 years of age, you know, he might have not thought about that things, or it might have happened to himself, or he might have been coerced into doing this. But I think a lot of the robberies that we've seen at spiking robberies, street robberies, in general, for people's Rolex watches and stuff like that. So a part of this is about flaunting, you know, I've got this and blah, blah, blah. And the young people think, well, I can't actually get this by legal means because of a poor educational system, or the lack of support, or the lack of empathy, or neglect, or shame. And the only way they can exert any form of power is through violence. And that's a shame in our society if we've kind of, you know, led young people down to the only path they can see of getting any kind of fulfillment or any gain in their lives.
Just to add, there was and again, I know Charlie would agree with me because we worked a lot on this together in the past, but there was a real point in Hammersmith and Fulham where there were drill artists who have now gone on to great success, particularly drill artists in K&C, our neighbouring borough. And when our young people were seeing those people achieving great success and still are achieving great success, and their drill music contains very serious threats to each other, that's where as a collective we work together with one of our former police officers who's now on Project Alpha to work with the police and identify what was being said, who was targeting who. And there were some very successful criminal behaviour orders that were generated by police in Hammersmith and Fulham to stop those artists from perpetrating violence by insinuating violence on specific people. And they were one of a kind criminal behaviour orders. And so there is that element that there can be glorification through drill music. But I think this is really where we thought Rebel Records might help. Because again, we were hearing from a lot of our young people in South Fulham, yeah, let's get into drill, because you think you're going to make money quick and have your foot still in the criminal world. But again, we need, okay, you can get involved in music, but it doesn't have to go down that route. And that's where we're proud to work with Rebel Records, because again, they have lived experience and they don't want young people from Fulham, Hammersmith and Fulham going down that route. There doesn't have to be the glorification of violence. You can still be a very successful artist without that being brought into it. They can talk about their lived experience, but you don't have to threaten other people. So that's something that we've been working on. So I just wanted to put that in about the glorification of violence, particularly in the music genre.
Thank you, Gemma. And I should say, I forgot to mention earlier, but thank you, Councillor Dinsmore, for mentioning your experience, and thank you for the work you did, because I know you had a petition up which gathered more than 100,000 signatures, I think, to ban the use of machetes, the sale of machetes, sorry.
If I may just briefly explain on that. So yeah, I was mugged with a machete and I went home and typed into Amazon machete. And not only could you buy a machete, but they'd also try and sell you a balaclava at the same time. It's incredible. So I set up this petition online. It's got 125,000 signatures now. Hopefully the government will do something about it. I mean, in my view, it's a total apolitical point. You know, some people in agriculture say they need a machete. That's fine. You don't need a Dragon Slayer matte black 18-inch machete for agriculture use. So I think we should just get rid of these. But no, thank you for mentioning that.
Thank you. And I think if the members agree, we will stop at that. Are we happy to note the report? In that case, we've noted the report. Many thanks, Michael, Charlie, and Gemma. We'll now take a short 10-minute break while we change the panel, and so that we can meet each other. And we'll be back for item 6, violence against women and girls. Thank you. Hi. Sorry. And we're back. Thank you. Thank you all. So we're now moving to item 6 of our agenda, which is the item on violence against women and girls. And we have presenters and guests and contributors. We have Beth Morgan, our Community Safety Manager. Neil Fellow is back at it again. And Laura Dix, Senior Service Manager at Advance. Dr. Akima Thomas, Clinical Director from the Women and Girls Network. And we also have Martina Palmer joining us online, who is the interim head of service at Refuge. We're trying to sort out the IT issues, and we'll definitely have your questions heard. Sorry about these issues. Right, so Beth, would you like to start off?
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now? Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'll just provide a bit of background on our VOG response, and then I'll hand over to our partners that are here today who can speak to some of our services in more detail. But just for a bit of background, so in summer 2021, we recruited our first Ending Violence Against Women and Girls lead for Hammersmith and Fulham, Annabelle, who's here in the audience today. And from there, we've started to grow our VOG portfolio and our VOG work. So in March 2022, thanks to Annabelle's hard work and all her coordination, we published our first Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. So that covers 2022 to 2025. So that sets out our 5-year action plan for how we're going to tackle violence against women and girls in Hammersmith and Fulham. Our strategy was co-produced with victims and survivors of violence against women and girls, and it outlines, as I say, what we're going to do to tackle VOG in Hammersmith and Fulham. So that strategy was shared with the paperwork for this meeting, so everyone should hopefully have had a chance to have a look at that. But if not, we can certainly take any questions on that off the back of the meeting. I can also talk a little bit more about our co-production on that strategy as well, as we go through today. So I should say in Hammersmith and Fulham, we adopt a coordinated community response to violence against women and girls. So that acknowledges the role that all agencies play in tackling the crime. So we don't tackle it as a council problem or a police problem. We involve all of our partners and all of our communities in tackling the offences. So that was very much the way that we designed our strategy and the action plan, with sort of actions sitting across all of our different partners. So including ourselves, local charities, community organisations, NHS, police and others. So as I say, the report that we submitted today covers sort of 3 main elements of our VOG service provision. There's quite a lot in there, so we won't go into the full detail. As I say, we could talk about each of these items probably for quite a while, but I'll give a very broad overview, and hopefully if there's probably questions that come out of the report as well, so we can talk about those. But the 3 main elements that we've included today are around our refuge and safe accommodation provision, and that's the provision that we commission as a local authority, and that's delivered by Refuge, who can speak to that later on in the item. And the second part, we've talked about our commissioned domestic abuse support services. So specifically, that's the service that we commission through the Angelou partnership, and that's for sort of independent domestic violence advocates and workers who work specifically with women affected by violence against women and girls. And the third section that we included was around our survivor consultation, which was commissioned with Women and Girls Network, who are also here today. And that's looking specifically at how we engage survivors in all of our services, and we ensure that they are involved in all stages of our commissioning process, and they're able to really feed into what we are delivering and make sure that the services that we deliver really meet the needs of victims and survivors. So that'll be, I'm sure there'll be lots of questions on that. It's a really interesting piece of work that we're really passionate about. So more on that to come. So as I say, the report provides background on each of those services that we commission. We also included some of the performance data as appendices in there. So there's some more information about sort of what we monitor and how we oversee those services as a department. So happy to take any questions on that as well. One point to note on the report, since it was submitted to the committee, point 20 in the report talks about some funding that we received from the GLA called the Domestic Abuse Safe Accommodation Fund. So in the report, we talk about how we're yet to have confirmation on that funding for next year. I'm pleased to say, since the report was submitted, we have had confirmation that that funding is going to be confirmed for next year. Certainly verbally, we're just awaiting written confirmation of that, but I'm sure everyone will be very pleased to hear that, because as we put in the report, that was something we were quite concerned about. So that's some good news since the report was submitted over to you. And then the last section of the report, which I'll talk about a little bit more, is our plans for 16 days of activism. So that runs from the 25th of November through to the 10th of December. And that's looking specifically at gender-based violence. So it's an international event that happens every year, specifically this year with the overlaps with the World Cup. It's something that lots of organisations are looking at more closely, specifically because we do tend to see, unfortunately, that domestic abuse offences do increase during major football tournaments, including the World Cup. So you'll see lots of campaigns are looking specifically at that overlap as well. So this year we're running various events, and we'll publish the full event schedule to everyone in attendance shortly after this meeting. We're just finalising the details, but just to give you a flavour, we've got various events running this year, including workshops on allyship and bystander intervention, looking at the role that the community can all play in tackling violence against women and girls, particularly in the public realm. We've got webinars for professionals on raising awareness of harmful practices. We're promoting our Ask for Angela scheme and licensed premises across the borough. And we're also hosting an event in solidarity with women in Iran, as well as a communications campaign to raise awareness of all our violence against women and girls services. And as I say, we'll share the full schedule of events after the meeting today. But yeah, that's it from me. I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Beth. That is very useful, and thank you for submitting the report, and congratulations on confirmation of receiving the funding. That is very good news. Let's move to our partners and contributors. Laura, would you like to start telling us what it is that the work you do, and how you're working with the council?
Yeah, of course. Can you hear me all right? Yeah, so my name's Laura and I'm the Senior Service Manager at Advance. So Advance was set up in 1998 right here in Hammersmith, and actually that's where our head office is based. Yes. Thank you. So as part of the charity, we kind of have two arms to it. So we support women who are experiencing domestic abuse, and also women who've got experience of going through the criminal justice system. And quite often that you find that the cohorts are actually the same, and there's lots of crossover. So under my kind of portfolio, I oversee some IDVAs that are co-located within Hammersmith and Fulham Children's Social Care, some group work. And what I'm here to talk to you about today is about the Angelou Partnership. So with that, it's various organisations that have come together in a consortium called the Angelou Partnership that are working together to support women and girls who experience domestic abuse. So there's a variety of different organisations who've come together as part of this partnership. There's Advance, which is where I work, and we are an IDVA service, so that's Independent Domestic Violence Advisors. And we've got a team of advisors who work with women aged 13 plus. We work with them for around 3 to 6 months and kind of walk alongside them at what is potentially the most difficult time in their lives. We have specialist IDVAs who specialise in mental health, in substance misuse, and we have a young person's IDVA as well. As part of the consortium, there's lots of other partners with different specialisms, and the aim of the Angelou Partnership is that women get their needs met based on kind of who they are and what it is that they need. So one of our partners is the Women and Girls Network, which lovely Akima works for. So every partner brings a kind of different specialism. So Women and Girls Network, which I'm sure Akima will talk to you more about, but they lead around sexual violence in young people. We also have Solace Women's Aid, who support around sexual violence as well. We have an organisation called Gallup, who specialise in working with the LGBTQI plus community. And we have organisations that work with women, so Al Hassaniya, who works with Moroccan and Arabic speaking women, and ICRO, who are the Iranian and Kurdish women's rights organisation, who work with women from kind of Black and global majority background. So I can talk through a little bit about what happens when you call our service. So we have a free phone number that women can ring, or an email address that they can get hold of us through, or we get quite a lot of professional referrals as well. So from the point that somebody is referred or they call in, sometimes they'll actually indicate when they first contact us what their needs are, and we'll try and match women up with the services that most reflect kind of either their needs or their background, or what they're presenting with, what the needs that they're presenting with. All of our kind of partners across the Angeli Partnership will support with things like emotional support, navigating systems, so around housing and homelessness, if there's issues around kind of just general safety, so thinking about civil and criminal remedies, and basically anything that women come to us if they need support with kind of health, parenting, we'll be able to sort of signpost them to different agencies. Or all of the partners also have different services within house that may not be funded under the Angeli Partnership, but bring kind of added value. I think thinking about some of the needs that we're seeing coming with women through the doors. So mental health has been something that's been absolutely increasing across the pandemic, and sort of, I don't know if we can say post, but something that we're still seeing at the moment. And we often find that, I think we'll talk about it later, but the counselling waiting lists are often full. It's quite difficult. Obviously, mental health is a rising need, but actually the therapeutic support is often oversubscribed. We're also seeing the cost of living as a massive issue for women. So, for example, in some of the groups that we run, we're finding that although we can pay for women's travel once they arrive and kind of reimburse them, it's actually affording to kind of come to the centres. So we're trying to work around that and sort of provide online groups and things like that increase accessibility. Yeah, that's
Thank you, Laura. That is very kind. We'll move on to questions once you've all presented. Dr. Thomas, if you would like to speak. I should say that before the meeting, the consultation that I'm sure you mentioned in your presentation was circulated amongst all the councillors, and it's a really good piece of work. So we look forward to hearing more about this as well.
Yes, Women Girls Network, we've been established for 32 years and this is our home borough, Hammersmith for Fulham. So we developed our services from here. We are a pan-London service and have a wraparound integrated provision of services, including therapeutic work, individual therapeutic work, group work, body therapies, advice, helpline, specialist sexual violence and team, which includes West London Rape Crisis and ISVA service, and the London Gateway, which is for all survivors of sexual violence as a navigating point of accessing services. We also have research and consultation and training. So those are our kind of core services. But obviously, Hammersmith and Fulham were very bold and visionary in terms of commissioning us to develop the consultancy around looking at survivors of VORG in terms of developing an advisory panel. And it's bold because, and it's ambitious because it aims to hear those voices of more marginalised communities. I think we know that there's survivors who come forward, that we hear a lot of those, of their understanding about their experiences. This consultation aims to do two things. One is obviously, while we've got survivors, to think about and to talk about how they've experienced services, what's worked, what hasn't, what are the gaps in terms of how survivors have experienced services. So that really survivor-led approach, what does that look like for services, for survivors of VORG? And then secondly, and this is the boldness, in terms of developing an advisory panel. Now, the advisory panel would be set up to provide scrutiny, accountability, involvement in policy decisions, commissioning decisions, a lead on maybe research, but really have that kind of sense of equity in terms of how survivors' voices is carried to those more strategic levels. So that for us is kind of quite an exciting piece of work. So we're obviously commissioned to look at, with an intersectional lens, who are those communities that don't come forward? Who are those communities that don't even access survivor or VORG services, who may not even identify as survivors of VORG? So it's those individuals that we want to capture. So we're trying to cast our net as wide and as far as possible to reach into those communities, whether they be through mental health services, men and boys, LGBTQ community, those who have accessed mental health services. So really having that mixture of individuals and to ask them key questions about One, what would an advisory panel mean to you? How would you be able to take part in that? What would be the barriers to you taking part in that? How do we ensure that those spaces would be equitable? How do we ensure that those who haven't been represented would be represented? So a whole raft of questions. Obviously, Women and Girls Network is the rape crisis lead for London. So we have representatives of all 4 rape crisis: South London, West London, North London and East London. And we hold the Pan-London advisory panel of survivors looking at particularly around sexual violence. So we've used that group to also inform and co-produce all of the work that we have done with this work. So this is their first piece of kind of, if you like, commission piece of work, and it's worked really brilliantly, long, but brilliantly, in terms of having that involvement, having their insights. We thought we was doing really well with our poster, our questions, and the advisory panel was, no, I don't think so. So really changed it. So that's been really refreshing. So maybe that's also our insights. We're going to share those insights with you. And obviously the advisory panel are involved in every step of the way. So they'll be taking part in the co-facilitated groups that we would be running, the focus groups, to hear from survivors. They've developed the surveys that have gone out to survivors, but also to professionals, because obviously we want professionals, we want to hear from professionals in terms of maybe what the barriers are to having experts with lived experience, and how they might channel those voices in their services. And obviously the development of the questions for the focus groups and will be co-facilitated, and obviously with us in terms of writing the report and the recommendations. So I think that's
Lovely.
it for me.
Thank you so much. That is a lot for us to consider. And we can now move to questions. Who would like to go first? Councillor Dinsmore.
Hi, I'd like to reiterate a heartfelt thanks for the hard work that you are doing as well. I've had some female friends who've experienced sexual violence and they've gone to the criminal justice system. And this was sort of, I guess, 12 years ago when we were at university. And frankly, it was an absolute disgrace, basically, the way they were treated. And so my question is, have you seen much of a change over the last 12 to 14 years in that? What more can be done? And what are you doing to try and help, for example, when people go to the police, how they're treated, et cetera, and what's being done on that specific issue? Thanks.
Yeah, sorry, if you can all, perhaps we can start with you, Dr. Thomas, and then we can move down the table.
I would like to say that things have changed, but I don't think they have. I think they've deteriorated. For example, because of COVID and other different things that are happening, your average wait to go to court now for a survivor who's disclosed sexual violence and is waiting for a court date is now about 5 years. So that's absolutely horrendous for somebody to be in that waiting place. And I think then we can think about the lack of justice that maybe happens in that system. I think there needs still a lot of work to happen with the police and how they report and how they hold and the resources that they have in order to fully support survivors going through that process. And also there's obviously things as well around survivors accessing therapy whilst that case is being held in the criminal justice process. So that's kind of quite a challenge for us at the moment, even though they've changed the laws around survivors being able to access. It still means that survivors therapeutic notes may be have to go to court, and there's something about that feels really uncomfortable for survivors to be able to access services and then disclose. And obviously there's a thought that that's going to be really beneficial for survivors, but there's reservations with that. So I think there's still a lot of resources, a lot of work to be done.
Yeah, I think for me, because Akima's organisation sort of specialises in sexual violence, I'm more kind of coming at it in terms of from a domestic violence perspective. And I was thinking actually that there's so many barriers to women even before they get to criminal justice system, specifically when you think about sexual violence from a kind of current or ex-partner. I think often the narrative in society is that it's going to be a stranger that sort of snatches you off the street. And what we find is that women find it really hard to disclose sexual violence, even within our services. So if you approach most domestic abuse services, you'll get asked a series of 24 questions, which sort of helps us to kind of ascertain the risk towards you from your partner or family member. And the sexual violence question, I think women really sort of often don't answer that at the beginning. It's only once you've built that sort of trusted relationship with them that's a little way down the line is that they actually start to talk about sexual violence, but perhaps talk about it in terms of coercion and things, you know, perhaps not even using those words, perhaps using sort of force or being sort of guilted into it or pressurized into it. So I think, you know, there's a lot of work to be done more in wider society, I think, about who can perpetrate sexual violence, who it happens to. And I think just thinking about our services, you know, often services are set up in a very high risk way so that we only work with women for a short period. But I think what we see is actually if you build those longer term trusting relationships, you actually get you really understand kind of the breadth of women's experiences. And that's when you start getting women sharing about what's happened to them. And it's then I think that you see the real benefit of our services, because we can actually sort of talk to women about what happens in the criminal justice system and really prepare them for that. You know, a lot of our partners like Women and Girls and Solace, some ITVs will kind of accompany you to court and do a run through, sort of sit with you and show you, you know, this is what the court will look like when you go to testify in your case. And I think all of those things can help women actually feel that bit more confident that, like I said, you know, somebody's walking alongside them through what is a really difficult system. You know, it's really alien to us with judges with wigs on and all that sort of thing. It can be really scary. So actually, I think our workers make a huge difference with that. But I think there's definitely absolute barriers in the criminal justice system at the moment, you know, kind of wider societal barriers that sort of feed into that, especially around sort of, I think, something for me personally, I think giving juries training about domestic abuse as well and sexual violence and helping them understand, you know, that, you know, yeah, just because a woman says no, that, you know, there's a lot of work to do, I think, around that.
If I may just make one brief follow-up
Yeah, sure.
on that. My mum's a barrister and she almost now exclusively prosecutes sexual crimes and historical sexual crimes. So just to add to Dr. Thomas's point, the number of collapsed trials add to the 5-year burden that you're talking about and how that can impact, you know, somebody's built themselves up to come and give evidence and then it all collapses, possibly after they've been cross-examined, and then they've got to go through it all again. It is just horrific. And just anecdotally through my mum, I've heard of similar projects. She's in Northern Ireland where they do help and it does make a big difference. So thank you for all your hard work on that.
Beth, if you want to add something.
Yeah, just a few quick points from me. Just to say as well, one of the objectives in our strategy is holding perpetrators to account. So under our strategy, we have various operational groups that look at the specific issues that we have identified across the system. So our operational groups do look at the criminal justice system very closely. And in those operational groups, we also have representatives from the police and various different agencies involved in that. So we can really keep an oversight of some of the issues that we're seeing. Also, just to mention, we do commission the Impact Project in Hammersmith and Fulham. So that's a co-located IDFA project. So that has so basically it's an IDFA that works specifically with women who are engaging in the criminal justice system, specifically around domestic abuse courts and domestic abuse offences. And we also deliver some training to police officers as part of that to help them to understand sort of how the project can support them and how they can support the women to ensure that those referrals are made. And we are also looking as part of our sort of next steps and where we want to grow. We are looking at where we can do more around working with perpetrators and some of the early prevention work as well. So that's just a bit of a flavour of some of the things that we're doing kind of under that objective.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Miri.
And thank you very much for all the work you do. Just to really reiterate that. Thank you. My question is, you know, VORG, I think it rightly obviously centers the issue on women and girls, but I think I'm right in saying that the majority of the violence comes from men. So based on, I mean, this is a very, very big question, but based on your experience and expertise in this area, what would you say is the solution, the long-term solution, long-term remedy to preventing it from happening in the first place? So whether that's sort of education, you know, young boys, or outreach in schools or communities that there might be cultural barriers. I'd be interested to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, again, Dr. Thomas, if you want to start, and we can go down the table.
Oh, yes, okay. Yeah, I always dread questions like that because it is so enormous. But I think there is something about how do we understand the roots of violence? You know, how do we understand social inequality? How do we understand power? How can we redress at that level? I think is really important. So it is about those higher systems. It is then thinking about what are the community responses? You know, how are we going to have legislation, sanctions, education, understanding in terms of that broad sweeping way that raises awareness, but also does more than just raise awareness as well. So I think those prevention programs, you know, as you said about, you know, prevention, I think is going to be really key in terms of ensuring that boys and girls are informed from a very early age about relationships, about healthy relationships, about that we teach our children about power and power differentiation. So I think it's those kind of rooted things, because I think sometimes we want to tinker at this level and think about those social structures and those social changes that have to happen at that deeper level. So lots more resources, and I think a will and a motivation. It always fascinates me why we don't have more public awareness programs, adverts in terms of how we understand relationships. We're still maybe where we was, you know, a couple of decades ago, and I don't see and I don't understand why we're not progressing, you know. And as we were saying earlier about the legal system, there's quite fundamental changes that need to happen. But I think it is for me about that will and that intention to make change happen, to create a more equal society with thinking about equity and equality and how those things move together. It's a bit waffly, but
Yeah, I think I completely agree with Akima. I think to end it or to prevent it, I think you'd need a really multi-pronged approach. But I think the thing that I feel really passionate about is prevention. And I think there's something about, again, I talk about the sort of societal narrative about it, but I think, you know, even if you go back to sort of fairy tales and things like that, there's lots of narratives around sort of possession of a partner. When you look at soap operas, you know, all of the kind of popular media that we sort of see in our day-to-day lives. And I think if you can kind of capture more of that narrative and start to change it, I think that helps. Like one of the things I was thinking that could do practically around here is that quite often you see reports in the media about domestic abuse, but often, you know, the police will say, oh, it's an isolated incident or something like that. We know it's not an isolated incident. It may be from that one man, but possibly not. But actually it's something that's happening, you know, across homes everywhere, across Hammersmith and Fulham, but, you know, across the UK. And I think, I don't know if there's local newspapers here, but there's sort of reporting guidelines that newspapers can sign up to around domestic abuse. But I think that for me is really helpful because people often read the press, you know, and they get different ideas about that. But I think definitely, you know, going out in schools, like our Young Persons Info goes out into schools and gives presentations. But I think really sort of getting in there with children when they're young and sort of talking to them about, you know, possession isn't love, and trying to kind of counter those narratives and give them a space to talk about it as well and explore. Because it often feels like a lot of the work that we do is kind of firefighting, and actually, you know, you want to see it stopping at its source, and that, you know, it's you know, so nice to be thanked for the work that we do, because it's hard, and sometimes, you know, our staff are seeing every day, you know, we get great results for women, or the women themselves get great results with our support, but, you know, I think yeah, to see more prevention of it, I think it would only be a good thing. So.
Thank you. I think our other speakers have said it really well, but no, absolutely. I think it's important that we note that these are gendered crimes, and there is it is absolutely gendered, and it's rooted in an inequality that we see across society. As we've said, prevention and early intervention work really is vital on this, and as a few people have mentioned now, that sort of healthy relationship work in school really is key here. And likewise, you know, community responsibility, and that's why we talk about a coordinated community response and the role that we all play in building a society that takes a zero tolerance approach, and that's something that we're looking at more and more, and the role of men as allies and challenging these behaviours, and that I think that's becoming something that we talk about more and more, which I think is really great to see. Likewise around sort of bystander intervention and what we can all do in lots of small ways to step in when we start to see things that concern us. And something that we're looking at more and more recently is projects that work with young people in a sort of early intervention angle. So when they're starting to display some concerning behaviours, having sort of specialist programs that go in and work with them at that stage to sort of address that behaviour at the earliest point before it starts to escalate. But yeah, very difficult question.
Thank you. Sarah Lamger from People Arise Now would like to ask a question if you want to turn on the mic.
Is it okay if I ask 2 questions?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the work that you do. It's also very close to our hearts. We know quite a few people, we work with quite a few people who've suffered domestic violence. And one of the barriers that they mention is having to tell their story multiple times to multiple people. Is there a way where they can just tell their story initially and make a statement, get everything out? I know maybe things will come later, but get like an initial full statement that they then can take away themselves if they want to go to different services, but it's just something that it's not just lost over here and they can't use it over there. So that's my first question.
Yeah, I think that would be absolutely ideal if that was possible. But then I guess each service has its specific remit. So for us, a survivor might be coming through our ISVA service, and, so we need to collect and capture information about where the case is, whether they've reported, what their needs might be. Safeguarding concerns are really kind of quite key. And then we might transfer them over to our counselling service. And again, some of that information might go through to that counselling service, which we would hope, but we would also hope that that second telling isn't re-traumatizing, but is also it is beneficial in terms of survivors, I guess, also hearing, what's taken place and understanding that from a more therapeutic level. And I guess one of the differences in terms of some of the ways that survivors can tell their stories, it wouldn't be about an interrogation of responsibility, truth, and what happened, but more about how did it feel for you. So I think there's a different narrative that can happen. But I absolutely agree. We need to make sure that we're not re-traumatizing survivors by them having to repeat their stories to services that aren't necessarily trauma informed and don't know how to respond to that. And the repeating of it is met maybe at times inappropriately with either asking inappropriate questions or with silence. So
yeah, I mean, I agree with what Akima was saying. I just one thing that I can speak to with that is that one of the benefits, I think, of the Angelou partnership is that we've got all of these organizations that have come together and there's only kind of one access point to it. So whereas previously, if you had, somebody might approach my service and we might do an assessment with them, and, the assessment could last an hour or so, finding out really, telling us your story. And then for us to say, oh, actually, there's a different service that would have been better, give them a call, and tell your story again. What we can actually do is either, when the need is identified right at the beginning, we can actually transfer them over to ICRA or Al Hassaniya or, a sexual violence service. Or once we get all of their information, we actually accept each other's referral forms as well. So we can kind of pass through, we've got one referral form, I should say, that's accepted. So I think that goes a long way to help with that. And I think that, to my knowledge, there's not many consortiums, if any, like the Angelou partnerships. I think it's really innovative, actually, what we're trying to do here, and does reduce the burden of the woman having to keep telling her story. And the other thing that kind of came to mind is that I know in our service, we've talked a lot about we're not keeping records on women, we're keeping records for women. And actually, when they do tell us their stories, for example, we get women calling us a year later saying, well, could you provide a support letter around housing or for my GP or for family court or something? And we're able to look back on our notes and actually put something together for her to say how we've supported her, and that can kind of help her in future. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I think exactly what Laura's just said. That's one of the big benefits of the Angelou partnership in having that consortium, having that oversight. But absolutely, it's a big issue, and it's something that we're really aware of. I think we can all appreciate that actually approaching different agencies and our systems are very complicated, and there's lots of barriers that women face navigating all of our systems. And it's really important that we as sort of service providers follow women through that journey, and that we sort of take, we take case studies and we understand, and we track those cases through and look at all the different times, as you say, that they've had to retell their story or they've had to approach a service, and then the complexities that are involved in that. So yeah, I don't have an easy answer, but it's something that we're really mindful of, and something that we're really trying to do more and do better to stop women having to do that.
And it is something that I can see, ending violence against women and girls strategy, which is helpfully attached to the agenda. We spoke to survivors, and many actually raised this point that they have to keep telling the stories, whether to the GP or to council services. And it is something identified as a priority that we need to tackle. And, as Beth said, it is something that they're working on. Second question. Sorry, yeah, Councillor Harvey.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you already did this, but just sort of hearing what you were saying and the responses. In the advice world that I work in, we always provide people with an advice letter. When we first meet them, we talk to them, we get the information, and we follow that up with an advice letter. This is what you told me, and then this is what we advised you. And we give it to them, so they're empowered and they can do whatever they like with that. And it just seems to me, rather than having to come back maybe a year later, or maybe they will still need to, but at the onset, sort of empowering those women is to actually give them a letter saying, this is what you told me, just like we do in the advice world, and here you go, and it's yours to do whatever you want to. So if you want to give it to your GP or your housing officer or whoever it is, that you can actually do that. And I just think that's would be a way of addressing that issue and empowering women.
Thank you, Councillor. Sarah?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. So the second question is, do you work with restorative justice facilitators as well? In terms of supporting, say, if they need to go through the criminal justice system, because I know that they support the person who's been harmed, and it can be an empowering way. It's not for everybody, but it's an option. So I was just wondering whether you work with restorative justice facilitators.
If you don't mind, I'll take that question away and look into that properly. I'd like to give you a full answer. So I'll take your details afterwards and we can follow up.
And I should add also for the partners joining us online that because of the technical difficulties, it may not be possible to ask the question tonight, but please email our officers, Neil Thurler in particular, and ideally we'll also add the question and the answer in the minutes that will be published shortly, including Beth's answer to this. Do we have any other questions, Councillor Dinsmore?
So there's one very quick follow-up question to Beth on the preventative measures you mentioned a moment ago. I'm just interested to know what the behavior looks like at what age, and what are the preventative measures, and how does that look? Because I certainly didn't exist 25 years ago when I was at school, so I'm just interested to see how things have moved on.
So it's a very new project that Children's Services are leading on. So unfortunately, I don't have all the answers to your questions. But as I say, I can find the information for you and contact you offline.
Do we have any further questions or contributions from the audience online or in person? Mr. Wright. Sorry, you would need to. That. You'll have the chance to thank me many times later. Let me just get through with this and then we can chat about it. Well, I have a question similar to the ones I asked the previous panel we had to all three of you. It's basically three sets of questions. What is the achievement that you're proudest of in your work? Well, that is relevant to today's agenda. And then what is the one thing that if you had all the resources in the world, you would like to introduce your craziest idea, something that you definitely like work to be done? And I guess the third point, and thinking to your work with the council or as the council in best case, what is one thing that you would like us to improve on, or would you like, not necessarily to improve on, but to do more of, which can inform our work going forward? Again, if we can start with Dr. Thomas and then we can move down the table.
Our greatest achievement, well, there's so many, but I think maybe is the advisory panel that we have saying that they were going to be independent and that they didn't need us anymore. I think that was quite an accomplishment. And also that they represent, you know, that healing arc in terms of maybe survivors who have come into services and have their own experiences and then are moving to places where they're supporting other survivors and are very bold, creative and enthusiastic about the kind of services that they wanna create. So, and really realizing the ambitions of empowerment and co-production. So I think, you know, that's a tremendous asset for us. And a testimony to maybe all the work that we do in terms of survivors being healed and being able to give back to other survivors. So that's one achievement I would think. In terms of what could we, you know, what the middle one was about, what would happen if we had
the ideal action or I don't know, project or something that you would just like to see?
The ideal project. I think more and more and more and more. So that would be more resources, more capacity, more training. I think more specialism as well. Certainly for Women and Girls Network, you know, we had a project called the Indigo Project, which worked with survivors who had mental health challenges alongside. I think there's a whole area that we are neglectful of in terms of understanding the complexities. And with that capacity comes, you know, maybe a more holistic way that we're offering advocacy, casework, body therapies, group work, and, you know, all of those different things, but really kind of tightly bound to the survivor, as opposed to them still going to different places to access those services. I think to work longer, we know that, you know, our 12 weeks, our year sessions aren't quite enough to see a survivor to that place of healing. And I think that would be the bold ambition about moving survivors from just surviving to thriving, and all of those things that are involved in that, in terms of that moving on life, which would be accessing training, more education or employment, but you know, supporting individuals beyond the immediacy of working with the trauma. And your last point about Hammersmith and Fulham, I think, you know, I think you're doing, you know, you're doing really well, but we also just need more. You know, we need more. I think it's commitment. It's not just the investment, but it's the commitment. It's the visibility around VOG. It's the things that you're doing around bystanders, around, you know, making sure that men are more involved and are held more accountable and responsible for what they're doing. I think that would be, in terms of that prevention work, would be kind of quite key. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Laura?
So I think for me, the biggest achievement, I was sort of thinking there's sort of two things, because, well, one thing, I was going to talk about the women themselves, but actually I sort of thought, for me, it feels like the staff across the Angelou partnership. I think, you know, many of them have kind of weathered the pandemic. You know, I think workers were kind of sat on the end of their bed on Zoom calls, you know, just trying to kind of go through day after day, sort of, you know, being locked up in their own houses, but actually supporting the women that were also locked up in their own houses, but in the same way, but also kind of a different way, living with someone who's, you know, terrifying. So I think, you know, the fact that our workers across the Angelou partnership have kind of come through that period of time, you know, they come into work day after day, they hear difficult stories, you know, they're supporting women through such difficult times of their life, and actually they've still got time at the end of the day to support each other and actually sort of give back to the organization and tell us what it is that they need. You know, my team sort of talking to them about what they need, what we could do better for them. And so I think just, yeah, the biggest achievement is just the team. And I think not just advanced, but I think across the Angelou partnership, you know, us kind of coming together and working as partners, I think is just a really great achievement and something that's been going, I think Angelou has been going for 2016, I think if I'm right. So actually, you know, it's just building and building on that, I think. And then I think in terms of what do we need more of, is that the next question? I think, I mean, absolutely echo everything that Akina said. And I think all I would add is just about more prevention work, but I think actually working with communities themselves, because I think, you know, we know that actually most people go to tell a friend or a family member about what they're experiencing before they actually approach services at all. And there's lots of work I think you could do with communities. And I can kind of imagine how the Angeli Partnership would be amazing at that, because we have such a breadth of communities that we support. So, you know, just more resource there for thinking about how we could work with communities to actually support women the first time that they disclose, actually being the time that they get the right support, you know, and are directed to the right services. And I think a big thing is kind of judgment and blame that a lot of women get. So actually, if they're getting the right response from the community, they're probably more likely to approach services. And, you know, I think it has a chain response. And then I think just for yourselves, I mean, I think it's amazing that you've got it on the agenda this evening. I think just keep putting it on the agenda. You know, I think investing in the survivors consultation is amazing. And I know our team can't wait to see that get set up and for survivors to kind of really give you the voices right from the source about what they need. We're definitely encouraging our survivors to take part in it. So yeah, I think that's great.
Thank you, Lauren. Beth?
So I think from a local authority side, the thing that I'm sort of most proud of is how we've seen sort of over the past few years, VOG really become a priority across all departments. Certainly sort of when I first joined community safety, it was very much a community safety issue. Whereas now I think all different departments across the local authority really do see their role in that. Some of the sort of more obvious ones like adults and children's, but also things like street lighting and highways. And it's becoming a conversation that's held really across the local authority. And I think that's great to see, and thinking about how we sort of design sort of the physical space and how we work with our licensed premises. I think we're building on strength on that, which is great to see. And I think in terms of the key challenges and what I'd like to see us sort of do more of with more resource, I'm conscious we haven't spoken as much about refuge provision this evening, but I think one of the key things I would say is it's something that we flagged in the report in terms of the capital works for our refuges, and we'd really like to build sort of more self-contained units and more accessible units and things like that in our refuges, and drawing on what Kima and Laura have said. Just having some more resource for sort of our workers to work with smaller caseloads and to work with women sort of across risk levels, I think would be great as well.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or contributions? In that case, I want to thank you. Are the members happy to note their report? Good. In that case, we have noted the reports. Thank you all for coming. If you just give us 5 more minutes, we'll just have some part of the agenda to go through. And oh, sorry. Yes, would you like to? Yeah, sorry, we have a final question from Martina Palmer, who is joining us online, but sadly has not been able to ask a question. If you just use the microphone, press the button, the other button. There you go.
Okay,
Thank you.
sorry, thank you. Yeah, so Martina has joined us online. She's from Refuge Charity. Unfortunately, there's technical issues, so we can't hear her. But she just wanted to answer some of these questions she just sent me in writing. So Refuge provide our domestic abuse refuge provision in some of our domestic abuse refuge provision in the borough. So that's to support women who are fleeing domestic abuse, fleeing their homes with their children. And so we provide accommodation for them in that crisis period, and then support them to move on and live independently. And so one of the things that Martina just wanted to highlight in relation to what they're most proud of in terms of achievements is working with women and having their voices be at the forefront of the work that they do. Whether that's in the kind of assessment plans they have for themselves and in the kind of support that is offered by the refuge. And it's reflected in the way that they run the services. It informs not only the crisis intervention support that they do, but the wider campaigns and lobbying. And Martina's given an example of a campaign that Refuge were recently successful in, which changed the law and making it illegal to threaten to share intimate images, which is a massive issue in domestic abuse relationships with previous partners, sharing this, and now it's become illegal. And that's been kind of a co-production work with survivors and really amplifying their concerns and their voices. And they've been successful in now making this illegal. And in terms of what kind of things I'd like to focus on moving forward, if I just really echoing everyone else with more resources, particularly with a good standard of housing for women moving on from refuges. We have a lack of housing across the country, and particularly in Hammersmith and Fulham, it's very difficult when women are ready to move on from the refuges to find somewhere suitable to go. And that means women are staying for longer times in refuges when they're ready to be moved on, because we don't have somewhere for them. And also the standard of the refuges themselves, improving accessibility for women who might have different needs, and the children might have different needs. Whilst in refuge as well, making sure that they can address all of the different needs that women have, not just the immediate need of housing, but access to education, employment, mental health services. And I know that this has been raised as well, but something that Martina raised is the waiting lists to access mental health support are immense, and people can be waiting years before they are able to get that really necessary therapeutic support. So yeah, sorry, I just wanted to make sure Martina's voice was heard in this as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And sincere apologies, Martina, and everyone else that we couldn't sort out the technical issues. And as I said, feel free to send your questions to myself, to Neil, and we'll be happy to answer them and have them in the minutes. We move on for the last couple of minutes to item 7, which is the work program, where we discuss potential work program items within the remit of our terms of reference. Is there anything that councillors would like to see in future meetings? I should say that the next meeting, which is on the 24th of January, will be a budget meeting where we'll be discussing the budget for our next financial year and the medium-term financial strategy. Any other ideas about not necessarily January, but further on? For my part, and I mentioned it to some of the guests here, of the first 2 meetings we had, we focused a lot on looking inwards and the law enforcement team and the services we have. I would really like us to have the police attend, and I think what we discussed here today, especially on the gangs unit item about the police and what they do, it would be good to have the police here with us, and perhaps even organizations that work with them, that we can all together ask them what they're doing and how they're doing and how they could improve and what the work is. But any other suggestions, Councillor Taylor?
Yeah, we've heard a lot about mental health services tonight, and in nearly every speech, and thank you for everybody for what you said, it came up, didn't it, the waiting list for mental health. So I wonder if it would be useful for us to have a mental health liaison person or somebody from mental health services locally to hear their side of things, because it's been fantastic for me hearing what's out there. I've learned a lot tonight, and I'm sure that mental health will be quite a useful thing locally.
Yeah,
from
definitely.
the
Well,
team.
we'll look into this because it sort of overlaps with the work of the health committee, but definitely I think everyone agrees on the priority and how we should be looking into this. And that's one reason why when we discussed the law enforcement teams item, we talked about the training they should receive. But yeah, this is definitely something we should look into.
Well, I was thinking particularly crisis mental health,
Mhm.
which wouldn't overlap too much, would it?
Yep. Councillor Mir, you had something?
Yeah, I think cost of living, like Councillor Taylor, I think the one thread that was through everything that we heard tonight was poverty. And I think that really needs to be front and center of everything we do going ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. The thing is, because it's such a big issue and across everything the council does, I think it's something that we'll be discussing at the policy unit and oversight board, which brings together all the different committees. It doesn't necessarily stop us from discussing it here, of course, but it is something that is much bigger than even a remit. Councillor Dinsmore.
Just thinking about the social inclusion aspect, the PAC as well as community safety, and there's obviously an overlap. It'd be really interesting if we could look at some community leaders and what more we can do to have better social inclusion and how that feeds into crime and how that might actually help to prevent crime, to have better communication across different groups across the borough. So I don't know if we can maybe look into that.
Yes, yeah, no, definitely. And I think, part of the reason why I think it's important to have guests from our partners and from charities here is precisely to show the link of how, crime and social inclusion and the third sector, they all interact and they all work together. Are there any further suggestions, ideas?
Just coming on from what Councillor Dinsmore said, I think the inter-community and interfaith aspect would be really interesting. You know, bring various different faith leaders together, different communities that might not just be hard to reach from the council, but that might not have interaction with one another. I think that would be really interesting to look at. Yeah.
Yep. And I think that is it. On item 8, the date of the future meetings. The next one, as we said, on Tuesday, the 24th of January, 2023. And the one after that is on Tuesday, the 21st of March, 2023. I want to thank everyone being here, my fellow councillors, our officers, and above all our partners and guest contributors. It's been wonderful to have. It's been eye-opening and very informative. And we will definitely have you back in one way or the other. Thank you so much. And thank you to those who joined online, and apologies that we were not able to join. I think actually that we now have a question from Councillor Quigley wanted to ask a question earlier. She didn't have the chance, but I think Bathsheba can now ask this for her.
Yeah.
That was from the first item on the law enforcement teams, if I remember.
And unfortunately, Councillor Quigley, my laptop has now died. Very sorry. But the question was to do with the consultation work on responsible dog ownership. And I believe you were looking for a response as to the reason why it was not possible to make that an easy read document. So it's going to be recorded in the minutes. So there'll be an action that's coming out of that, and that will be circulated offline. I hope that's okay.
Thank you, Bathsheba. And may I suggest that given all the IT issues, we also look at digital inclusion in the future for the committee. Thank you, everyone, and take care and see you soon. Thank you.